Hello, my name is Matt Bishop. I'm Managing Director at Brevity, and this is a recording of a presentation that I gave last week at the AWCI conference. So, rocking on through. I cover quite a bit of the changes, but one thing that I just wanted to note before I got into that is a change that hasn't happened yet that probably should have. Uh, some time ago, the Structural Design Actions standard for wind actions, that's ASNZS 1170.2, got updated. It went from 2011 to 2021. The cited code and the New Zealand Building Standards Code of Practice is still the 2011 version, which does leave us in a little bit of a tricky state because the cited standard is superseded, but the current standard isn't cited. Something to watch with wind loads because technically a design that complies with the 2011 standard is still current. All right, let's move on. Lots of changes. Some of them are incremental improvements driven by engineering or science getting better. ER 95, low damage seismic design guidelines, changes to 1170.5 all fall in that category. And some are driven politically. Earthquake Prone Buildings Act rollback, the Building Overseas Building Products amendments, and the Building Consent Authority changes will sort of lie more in that kind of politically driven category. So, rocking on through all of these things. This is a short, sharp overview and is really designed to show the breadth of changes that we're looking at. It's been a very busy year. So, the incremental improvements. First off, ER 95, which is a code of practice for the seismic performance of non-structural elements. It's being led by engineers from Beck at WSP, Brands, and University of Canterbury, which is to say that it's got the backing of some big players in the industry. It covers a whole lot of things: lightweights, partition walls, suspended ceilings, suspended services, suspended equipment, floor-mounted equipment, fire sprinklers, and exterior glazing systems. And the committee that's building it wants to expand that out even further. It's very design orientated and it refers back to the AWCI Code of Practices for practical information. One of the interesting things in the ER95, from my point of view, is that it is the first time we've seen a pragmatic or practical view on the C2, C1 anchor situation. And it currently states that low consequence of failure, high risk support redundancy, C1 anchors are generally considered appropriate for low risk applications, and actually calls out general services and ceilings as being part of that. So that's cool. Hopefully it stays in there. Fingers crossed. Low damage seismic design guidelines. So this came out some time ago, and it's preliminary or informational and it's preliminary or they issued volume one, which was really just telling us about it, but didn't give us any technical guidelines to know what to do about it. Those technical guidelines are coming out later this year. I'm doing a course in the later half of this year. The core of the low damage seismic design guidelines is it establishes damage specification for superstructure and non-structural elements, and it requires repair costs to be factored into the design methodology, essentially working out whether something meets the requirements for repairability as opposed to just making it stronger in the first place. It's likely to be applied immediately to hospitals and schools, but may also be picked up fast by high-end residential or commercial. And this is the sort of thing that we're looking at in the interior space, cracking in drywall, in partitions or ceilings. And I very much think that it's going to create a demand for a new way of attaching our ceilings to our superstructure or our interiors to our superstructure to prevent this sort of damage. So I'm quite keen to see how that develops. Okay, onwards. TS 1170.5. This is a technical specification that is being issued primarily because they changed the National Seismic Hazard Map, or the earthquake risk, or the Z factor, and some areas got worse and some areas got better. It doesn't replace NZS 1170.5. It will be introduced as an alternative method for building code compliance, and clients will get to choose which one they like to use. So for interiors, the Z factor changes are offset by the ductility factor changes, which will mostly end up with our designs being somewhat the same. But all our current calculators and methods will need to be updated to take into account this new method. One big thing that changes is there's no more importance level in the technical specification, and there's a three-column matrix, which gives us a different level to design to. This is also coming out later this year. I think that this particular change is likely to confuse clients who have to choose which one they need to use, and mostly NZS 1170 will provide the more cost-effective design, but sometimes it could be TS 1170 that does that. So it's going to be very hard to advise on this until we get a little bit more information, a little bit more experience with it. Okay, politically driven changes. First one of these is the Earthquake Prone Buildings Act. And this is going to take a little while to roll out. It's going to be in consultation next year, and will maybe go into law in early 2027 before we see things actually changing. And I'm finding more about this one as we go. I now know that 97% of the earthquake-prone buildings are likely to be affected by this in one way or another. So of the 2,000 odd on the list, only 80 or 3% are going to require the full retrofit that was being applied everywhere. So it's quite a change, this one, and quite a lot of people quite excited by this, but it will take a while to roll through. All right, overseas building products. There's a lot in this. The Overseas Building Product Standards and Certification Scheme Amendment Act. And it's best looked through in three parts. And MB's generated three different triangles for us to look at. This is the first one, which shows the building product specifications, where they've created a list of standards that are acceptable, but doesn't mean that they're automatically accepted. Things like which standards for steel, which standards for concrete, which standards for chimneys, things like that. It includes overseas standards like BCAs and ISO, but it also specifically defines New Zealand standards, makes some things like fire ratings a little bit easier for some products, but it seems to be more of a supporting element than a outright change. This one, the approved product certified overseas, is more interesting, more important, because you can see it sits in the dotted red line shape there, considered deemed to comply, which means that if you've got recognized products certified overseas, they comply with the building code automatically, as long as they're recognized by the minister. And I've already started on this one with importing watermark systems from Australia. Watermark is a certification system they use in Australia for plumbing, and then bringing those watermark systems directly over. It will in time mean that systems tested overseas will automatically be deemed to comply in New Zealand if they're approved through this channel. And it means that things like track lock testing to the California Hospital Design Guidelines will be able to apply for that testing to automatically be deemed to comply for New Zealand. So that one is quite interesting. And then the endorsed standards is kind of similar to the building product specifications, but it's not specific to the products themselves. It is just a list of the endorsed standard bodies and specific standards that we like in New Zealand. And you can see all the common players are there: the Europeans, the British, the Americans, the Australians, the Canadians. Essentially, we're saying that there's plenty of their building product standards that are similar enough to ours to carry on with. That's not overly surprising because most New Zealand standards are very closely based or aligned to these overseas standards anyway. I don't think this is a game changer. I think it's a supporting element for the other things that are happening. So there we go. 3 different triangles, building product specifications. It's making me wonder a little bit, but I don't quite see what that one's for. The recognized product certified overseas, I think this is the big one, and I like what's happening there. And the endorsed standards seems to be a list of standards that we thought were pretty good before anyway, but now we've endorsed them officially. Okay, building minor variations regulations. This one kind of slipped in under the radar last year, the September 2024. Minor variations, but I don't think this is a minor change. This is what it used to say. A minor variation is a minor modification, additional variation to a building consent that does not deviate significantly from the plans and specifications to which the building consent relates. Typically, that was interpreted to mean a like-for-like substitution was a minor variation. If I change one 64 by 0.75 steel stud for another 64 by 0.75 steel stud, then that could be a minor variation, say. However, the new words, so something quite a bit more specific. You'll see one is the same, but 1A, this is the new part. Substitution of a comparable product is a minor variation if the product achieves an equivalent level of performance. It is not likely to affect the compliance of other parts, and the consequences of failure will not be significantly worse. What this means and how it's being interpreted by councils is that we're no longer like for like, we're like for like performance. So if I had a 64 stud wall that had, maybe it had a 0.3 kPa wind pressure on it, and I had 64 by 0.75, and I had a 92 by 0.55 stud wall, so it's a thinner gauge, but it's a bigger section, and I had the same wind pressure. Well, they're going to be able to take the same load. It's not a like for like substitution, but it is like for like performance. And that, to me, seems to meet the requirements of a minor variation. What that means is that if it's goes through as a if that change goes through as a minor variation, it doesn't need a consent update or a new PS1, and won't need the engineering to be redone. It appears that this is the way it's being played out. Auckland Council now have a full-time minor variations team to allow for the workflow from this change, so something's definitely happening there. And I think that this means that we used to do some jobs where we would look at a product substitution into the engineering system, and we would get to redo all of the calculations. Because of that, to redo the PS1, it was quite an easy job because we already had all of the calculation templates set out, and we could make a nice profit on that. I don't think those are going to be required going forward. So it makes me a little bit nervous, but it's probably a good thing for the industry. So, All right. This one is interesting. So traditionally, the councils have been held to joint and severable liability. Well, actually, the whole liabilities around a building project have been joint and severable, which means that anybody can take all of the liability for a stuff up. And what happened with the leaky buildings situations was that the council would typically be the only one left after 20, 30 years, so all of the liability would fall to them. What proportionate liability means is that the councils will only be taking on their proportional section of the liability, so not all of it. If we had a similar situation in 20 or 30 years and they were the only ones left, they may only have to pay 5 or 10% of the liability or the cost. So it's essentially reducing the liability on the councils quite considerably. And I think that will tend to change the risk appetite of the BCAs, and it will likely require more comprehensive insurance for builders and subbies, maybe 10-year insurance cover for these proportionate liabilities. I'm saying that because that's what's happening in New South Wales, who also have a proportionate liability scheme. This is not a regulation change in itself. This is a change to how the BCAs are operating. This year we have our first private building consent authority, Building Consent Approvals Limited. I mean, it's sort of first after KO, who have had consentium for a while. But it is changing the view that a council in a particular territory, a BCA in a particular territorial authority is the BCA that needs to do the consent work. And what we've also seen is that nationwide players like the supermarkets are tendering their consent work to specific councils. So we've got the likes of Auckland Council and Christchurch Council competing to do the consent work for the supermarkets nationwide. Christchurch will end up doing consents for Auckland supermarkets. And I think that's a really interesting proposition, because it means that the BCA departments in the councils are suddenly much more competitively focused. They're tendering for jobs in the same way that we have to tender for jobs. I think that can only be a good thing for looking at their operational pressures. If Christchurch can't get their consents done to the satisfaction of the supermarkets, they could take them somewhere else. So you put all of those things together, and you have a less risk-averse BCA because of the changes to the liabilities. You have more commercial pressure. I think we're going to see them acting in quite a different way. And I'm pretty happy with that. But what that means is that we do need to be careful. All of these changes that I've talked about will inevitably lead to uncertainty and arguments, but also to opportunities if we can understand and act on them fast enough or appropriately. So watch your product specifications and contracts. Be careful that substitutions or design and build projects don't catch you out and end up in rework or LDs. So risky, but also opportunity, like all things, right? And that is it. That is my presentation. Just drop me a direct message, or you can call me on the phone if you're that sort, if you have any questions. Thanks.